Welcome to Love and the Marriage Squeeze, the podcast. I'm your host, Anietie. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a wonderful episode today because we are with the lovely Kendall Ferguson. Kendall is a woman I recently met, and we are going to become fast friends, I just know, because she's got things planned that I want to be involved with. She's talking about doing things for women's health and, making us more active, and I'm all about that. So I am sure that we are going to enjoy having a great conversation with Kendall today. And today we're going to talk about important women in history, and specifically one woman, Juanita Craft. She's a civil rights activist, and we're going to learn a lot more about her today by talking to Kendall. So let me tell you a little bit about Kendall. Kendall is a native Texan and an arts administrator with the city of Dallas. She loves working as an art administrator, and she loves working with artists, as you can imagine. And she's spent time with some legendary artists in the field, like Margaret Burroughs and John T. Scott. She also has a great love for community service and is really an advocate for women's health and wellness. Welcome to the podcast today, Kendall.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I know you're busy, as so many women are, right? Like that's women today. Like we've always been busy, but we're even busier now with family and friends and jobs. And so I certainly appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. So it is Women's History Month. Are you doing anything special to celebrate it this year?
Well, yes. Well, I think, first of all, every month, like Black History Month, it's Women's History Month. So we're always in a cycle of uplifting women. And I recently just learned about International Black Women's History Month. And so I'm really going to amplify the voices of those women locally who made a difference for women in the community.
That's fantastic. I've never heard about this International Black Women's History Month.
History Month, yes, and it is being recognized this year by the Library of Congress. So it's only been since around 2016. So it's a new thing. I'm just learning about it, but I will definitely be amplifying those voices and championing to get more people to bring awareness to it.
I love that. So what month is it exactly? Is it the same as Women's History Month? It's
No,
March, or is it?
it's April. So yeah, so I'm February, March, and April. It's all about celebrating.
That's a lot of celebration, which it
Yeah.
should be, right? Like
Yes.
I think it's fantastic for us to celebrate. Like recently we had a podcast interview with Dr. W. Marvin Delaney, and we talked about Black History Month. And I was like, it should be 365 days a year. And I actually learned that that was really the intent, that when it was created, it was supposed to be Black History Month, or Negro History Week was supposed to be, because it was first called Negro History Week. It was supposed to be a culmination of a year of study that students did about Black history. And I didn't know that. Like, well, that makes sense now. We're supposed to be studying it all year long, and then we just kind of celebrate what we've learned, during this week of February, which again, it was a week, and then it was stretched into a month. So it's supposed to be a year-long study. And I love that idea because
Yeah.
I feel like 1 month isn't enough to get all of it in, right? Like I need more. I'm just getting in good and like the month's over. So I'm happy to hear that we have now like these 3 months to celebrate, African American history, Black history, women's history. There's so much to learn and so much to know.
Yes. So I'm looking forward to it.
So who are some of your favorite women from history? Can you share some of your sheroes?
Well, I think my number one shero would be Zora Neale Hurston, just because she was an anthropologist and I studied anthropology. And, she she just danced to the beat of her own drum, and I love that about her and her spirit and the way she captured African American culture in those places that typically would not have had a voice. She's one. I'm also very fascinated with Billie Holiday, just about her voice. She was an unconventional woman, but she she was navigating in a world that was not easy for her. And I think that she did the best that she could do. So there's that. And of course, my mother, who um, who really my mother instilled in me my love of arts from a very young age, and also my love of community service. Those were two things that she really poured into me.
That's fantastic. Yes, mom,
Mhm.
right? Yes, mom.
Yes.
I'm with you. My mom was my shero as well. She still is, right?
Mhm.
I often do things or think of things like, what should I do? Like, well, what would mama do? Like, mom, like, mama was fierce. So I totally get that. And Zora Neale Hurston and Billie Holiday, those are also two of my favorites as well. Really, really love the work of Zora Neale Hurston and Billie Holiday. I think at one point, this was many years ago. I was in a Billie Holiday just mood where I listened to her music all the time, just like nonstop, and would sing the songs just nonstop. I was just
Mhm.
in the groove of it. And my best friend was like, "You just keep listening to all that Billie Holiday. It's like it's so depressing." I'm like, "I just feel it in my soul."
Yeah, yeah. And I think that maybe kind of people are afraid to speak on her because her story is so convoluted with her drug use and her lifestyle. But, she she was a force to be reckoned with. And, while we're not always our demons, you
Very
know.
true.
Yeah.
Right, right.
So
So let's talk about your work as an arts administrator with the city of Dallas. You have a very special position. You work in a very special place. Can you tell us about it, the Juanita J. Craft Civil Rights House?
I am there at the Juanita Craft House. I manage the day-to-day operations and develop programming that reflects the core values that Juanita Craft stood for. And Juanita Craft, she described herself as an ordinary woman that did extraordinary things. And it is unfortunately, not many people know about Mrs. Craft, but it is my job, and I feel very passionate about it in terms of making sure that people know who she is and the impact that she has and is still having on the lives of people today, not just in Dallas, not just in Texas, but actually across the United States.
So can you tell us about Juanita Craft's early years and maybe even about her parents or grandparents?
Sure. So Mrs. Craft, she was born in 1902. And so that's around 37 years after the end of slavery. To put things into perspective, her father was a professor at Prairie View. They were in Round Rock, Texas. Her mother unfortunately passed away when she was around 17. And so I think this is one of the things that really shaped Mrs. Craft's life was the death of her mother. Her mother had tuberculosis. And at this point in time, the disease was treatable. But Juanita took her mother to San Antonio to this hospital and asked that they admit her mother for treatment. They refused. Mrs. Craft at the time, she wasn't Mrs. Craft, she was Miss Shanks. She pitched a tent across the street from the hospital with her ill mother, and every day for weeks, she went and asked and begged and pleaded for them to admit her mother into the hospital. When she gave up, she brought her mother back, and her mother passed away shortly thereafter.
That's awful. So it was a white hospital. They weren't admitting Black people. Is that the case?
Correct, correct. And that was the first health inequity that impacted her life. And then she attended Prairie View and she wanted to go to University of Texas. She actually led quite a few student protests at Prairie View because the housing was insufficient and the food was insufficient, and of course the campus and the amenities. It was nothing like the University of Texas. The protest that she launched there at Prairie View, it was, of course, they did not have the same opportunities or the buildings or amenities that they had at the University of Texas at Austin because they were a historically Black college and university. But even on the standards of Prairie View, what the kids were being subjected to was substandard. The food was not fresh or always available. The housing was not adequate. The heating and cooling systems were not properly working. So it was just bringing awareness to the fact that they were not being treated well on the campus.
I'm curious about what got Miss Craft into civil rights. So, was it a variety of things? Her mother's death, the inequity she saw at her college? What was it that really got her started?
I think it was the health inequities that she witnessed. And two, her father instilled in her the passion to be a student of the Constitution. And Mrs. Craft had a major issue with the fact that this document outlines how everyone is to be treated, yet it doesn't apply to everyone. And so I think that those two things really fueled her desire to be involved in the civil rights movement. And so when she came to Dallas and she married her second husband, Mr. Kraft, he had an income that allowed her to stay at home. She didn't have to work. And he encouraged her to volunteer. And she went straight to the NAACP as a volunteer and just started working there. I think she was selling buttons and kind of worked herself up there, worked her way up. But yes,
Yes. And
so that,
how did she work her way up? I hear that she was highly involved, and I know, like, just from that other website that she had started a lot of chapters. Can you tell me about her work with the NAACP?
yes. So I think, well, when she moved on to Warren Street after the death of her husband, you have to understand that there were several other civil rights attorneys and people who were active in the NAACP in that neighborhood. And so they were all working together. And that house kind of became a central place for them to come and gather and strategize. And I'm assuming that this was the case because she wasn't married, she didn't have children. She did rent rooms out to people. So if people came in from out of town, they could stay there with her. They could meet there. So it was probably just an available space for them. So, and like I said, she just continued to work and within the organization, allowing them to plan their strategies for protests, for the court cases. And then when she became involved with the youth council, the kids would meet at her house. So,
That's fantastic. And so I had read on the website that she started, I think it was like 182 NAACP chapters. Is that
yes.
correct?
Yes, her and Lula White, they helped establish 182 chapters across the state of Texas, which is an incredible feat when you think about two women doing the one thing that the powers that be didn't want you to do. Because a membership in the NAACP meant that you were being given information about the civil rights movement, protests, ways to vote. If there were issues, you could apply to them for assistance. So they were doing it. A lot of it was done, kind of under the cover of darkness, moving from these small little towns. I mean, that takes so much courage and grit to do what they were doing, but they did it.
Absolutely. And like, can you paint a picture for us, for our listeners who may not understand what that looked like then? I mean, you are women in the South, in Texas, going around at this era promoting the NAACP that is all about the advancement of colored people. Can you kind of paint a picture of what that would look
Yes.
like? Because also you talked about she allowed people to stay at her home, and there was a particular reason why Black people, had to stay at her home and couldn't stay anywhere. Can you tell us a little bit about what the atmosphere looked like and the danger that she was in at this time?
There's this misconception that racial relations were just great in Texas and that white people and Black people, they knew their place and they were able to just get along. But the reality of it, to paint a picture of what was going on, people's homes were being bombed. It was a very scary time for Blacks during the 40s, 50s, and 60s here in Dallas because there was no there was no consequences for the actions of the white people against Black people. You had people being lynched during this time. The Convention and Visitors Bureau, they made postcards showing lynchings to attract people to Dallas, letting them know, hey, you might see a lynching if you come to Dallas.
It's
So
terrible. I mean, that's just terrible.
it is. And so the atmosphere for these two women to be, traveling by train and by car in the middle of the night, hoping to not bring attention to themselves. It's incredible that they did it. And one of the issues when we were deciding what should go into the house was, should we put Mrs. Craft's gun? She had no choice but to travel with a gun. And, it was, well, are we promoting violence? What if someone breaks in just to steal the gun? And finally, after like an hour of just like trying to keep my mouth shut, I just said, look here. I don't know an old Black woman in the South that didn't have a little something, something.
Right, because you had to protect
You had
yourself.
to protect yourself. And so they were like, "Oh," I was like, "Yeah, people will hear that story of what that she was doing, and they will know she had either a little pistol or a knife. She had to have something to protect herself." So,
It makes sense. It was such a dangerous time. And then I had also read that in her neighborhood there in South Dallas, if I got this correct, that in one year they had 11 bombings.
yes, yes. And that was something that I've just recently learned about, putting the screened-in porches on the homes. And a lot of times when you go in older Black neighborhoods, they will have these screened-in porches. Well, that's because once they threw that cocktail, that fire cocktail, if it just landed on the porch, you had a higher chance of saving your home from being totally burned down. So, yeah, no, they were and then the horrible thing about the bombings was that, okay, you've established yourself as in a middle class economic range. You're working, you are doing well for yourself. You get this mortgage on a house, but they wouldn't sell you homeowners insurance. So when they bombed your house and it burned down to the ground, you were sent into an a very deep level of poverty because you still had this mortgage, you still had whatever needs you had to take care of, but then where were you gonna live?
That's awful. It's just
Yeah,
awful. And here I am thinking that those screened in beautiful porches are just part of the architecture and the beauty of the home. But
yeah,
that is not even it. It was like
no,
creating a bunker for the house,
uh-huh,
creating some
it
protection.
It was. Yeah, and I was always like, "Oh, I bet that was nice. Open up the door, get a cross breeze." And someone was like, "No." And if you notice, they span the front of the house so
Right.
that they can't break into the windows of the house.
Right, right. So
Yeah.
here I'm with you. I'm thinking, "Oh, it's nice. We're gonna sit out here, have some lemonade, and enjoy the breeze." And it ain't even that, folks. Like, it is about protecting yourself as a Black person in America. This is terrible, right? It's
Yeah,
terrible what they
yeah,
had to go through. People bombing their homes, it just, these angry white mobs. It's just absolutely terrible. And the fact that they lived through that and had the courage to fight it inspires me. Inspires me.
yeah.
Yeah. She was a huge role model for young people, spurring them into activism. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for many years, actually, I think the first class of what is called Craft Kids, the Craft Kids of the Youth Council with the NAACP was 1953. A woman, she was in her early 80s. Her name was Marlene. She came and showed me her picture on the wall and explained that she was in the first class and that Mrs. Craft took her to the March on Washington.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the people who have come into that house, it's just incredible. Former councilwoman Diane Ragsdale, she was a Craft kid. The Pancho Madrano of the Madrano family is very politically connected. He worked with Mrs. Craft. The student Joe Atkins, who integrated the University of North Texas when it was North Texas State University, worked with Mrs. Craft. So, I mean, there's so many people, and we don't even know how many people who were in the youth council who are no longer in Dallas, who are working in other cities, just what they're doing. And so that's one of the things that we want to try to capture so that we can add them. I mean, the house, Louis Armstrong spent time in the house. Marian Anderson, and both of those people spent time at the house because they were denied at hotels. And so Mrs. Craft, she had space available, and so she could accommodate those traveling musicians. Thurgood Marshall, he spent a lot of time there in the house. Rosalind and Jimmy Carter. And so it was rumored that they actually wanted to spend the night there, but their security detail didn't think it was the best thing to do. We do
Wow.
believe that Rosa Parks, when they were discussing the Montgomery bus boycott, that she came down and spent time with Mrs. Craft at the house. Possibly Martin Luther King Jr. was there, and as well as Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Wow. So she had presidents, civil rights leaders, opera singers, jazz legends all staying
Yes.
at her house because they knew of the work that she was doing. They wanted to be there with her to talk about the work. And then some of the people that came, as I understand, came because they needed a place to stay and didn't have another place to stay in Dallas because they were Black and were not allowed to stay in other hotels, because of their race.
Yes, that is correct. They could not have a room in a hotel. And so there was just this network of families who had space and that they could stay there. Yeah.
So what exactly were the Craft Kids? You mentioned that.
Okay, so the Craft Kids, that was the a name that she gave her NAACP Youth Council members, the Craft Kids. Mrs. Craft was quoted as saying, "I have no children, so I adopted the world." I have not met one Craft kid who wasn't like, "Oh, and she was like a mother to me." So she really did. Not only did they meet to discuss issues that were relevant to them, they planned protests. The it was the Craft Kids who protested the integration of the state fair. It was the Craft Kids who participated in the lunch counter protests, the protest against the Majestic Theater. So they were doing the work. They were really doing the work.
So she's helping essentially to desegregate spaces herself and also with the kids that she's mentoring.
Yeah, so they protested, the students protested the State Fair of Texas. So during the 30 days that the State Fair runs, there was only one day where they would sell tickets to African Americans. And these students protested the entire run of the fair, and they also protested the one day that they could go, telling people, do not go in, do not spend your money with the State Fair of Texas. And so you hear about the protests at lunch counters, like at WL Green,
Right.
the movie theaters, such as the Majestic. So she was integrating, colleges, lunch counters, public spaces, just wherever, you have to think back about her passion for the Constitution. So wherever she saw that there was a difference of how people were treated based on not just the color of their skin, because she also did a lot of advocacy for people in the LGBTQ plus community during the 1970s. So whenever there was anything that she saw where people were not being treated equally, she was there. She was there trying to make a difference. And she received a lot of flack for it, and not surprisingly so, by the Black men who were on city council after her. I
Mm,
think Al Lipscomb was probably, if he was alive, would be the one person who wouldn't have much good things to say about her, because he did not like the fact that she brought up that there was no representation from the Mexican American community. She was going to gay bars, trying to keep the police from raiding the bars because people were losing their jobs if they
wow.
were found in these bars. She was working across the city for everyone.
Wow. It's just fantastic. Just such a legacy. She was
Uh-huh.
tireless, and she had some first, right? With the poll tax as a poll tax worker, as a voter. Can
Yes.
you tell me about some of those firsts?
Sure. She was the first African American woman to vote in a election here in the city of Dallas. She collected the poll tax. She was the second African American woman to serve on city council, and she was the first African American woman to be a Democratic precinct chair.
Wow. All of that. All of that.
Yeah, all of that. Yeah.
And so many of us, still don't know about Juanita J. Craft. And another thing that I learned is her middle name, that J stands for Jewel.
Yeah, for Jewel, Juanita Jewel.
Juanita Jewel Craft. And I thought about that and I'm like, and she was a jewel. All that
Yeah.
she did for our community, for African Americans, like you said, for the LGBTQ community, for Mexican Americans, she truly was a gem. She truly was a jewel that we can
Yeah.
celebrate.
Yeah, she was. And we're doing some research because we've had some people to come in and say she assisted with the integration of Girl Scouts in the Dallas Council. We definitely want to do that research so that we can add that to her list of the many things that she accomplished.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Keep
Yeah,
giving out those accolades for all that she did.
yeah, she did. And I would like to say, though, there's been people who've come into the house and they've talked about, several people have mentioned that towards the end of her life, she felt that her work really wasn't appreciated, or she felt as though she hadn't really done a lot. And initially, when I heard that, it made me very sad. But then I've come to realize, when people are doing great things, there's never enough that they believe that they can do. They always believe that there's something more that they could have done or should have done to make a bigger impact on the world. So when people say that now, I say, well, no, that just means that she was doing great things.
Yes, so true.
Yeah.
So much work to be done, and she just wanted to do more. So,
Uh-huh.
but such a life well lived and very inspiring for us, for
It
sure.
is definitely so because she worked up until the very end. I think she was 83 when she passed away, and she was working up, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that she was helping to plan the NAACP convention the year that she did pass.
Wow.
So, yeah. So she just kept moving, and that's great. That's what life is supposed to be about.
Hey there. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Coming up in the second half of our conversation, Kendall dispels a myth about Rosa Parks and reveals the hidden magic of the Craft House. Plus, I get all into Kendall's business, asking her about her relationship status and what kind of man makes her heart sing. If you like the podcast, please make sure to follow or subscribe if you haven't already. And make sure to hit that notification bell so you won't miss an episode. Now back to our discussion on the incredible Juanita J. Craft. It's incredible work that you're doing, spreading the word of her life and her legacy, because you're right. So many people don't know about Juanita Craft. And I first learned about her many years ago talking to Dr. Marvin Delaney. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't know. Right. And he
Mhm.
gave me a pamphlet about her. And this was when they were working to, I guess, begin the reconstruction of the home, the restoration of her home. It was many years ago before the house reopened. Can you tell us a little bit about the actual house and its reopening as a museum?
When Mrs. Craft passed away in 1985, it was her desire to leave her house in her will to the city of Dallas so that it would become, I don't think she saw it so much as a museum, but that it would always be a free space where people of like minded vision could come and organize. The house was occupied by Mrs. Craft for over 50 years. She purchased it after the death of her second husband, Mr. Johnny Craft. She lived there until the end of her life in 1985. At the time of her passing, she willed her house to the city of Dallas with the intention that it would just remain as a space where people, like minded people, could come and gather. There was a plan to pick up the dwelling and move it to Old City Park, but that decision was halted, and the house is where it stands originally.
I was there recently for the first time because it reopened to the public, and it is beautiful inside. And I talked to someone from the company that helped to restore it. I forget her
Yeah.
name. Maybe you can tell us her name. But she came and helped restore it. And so I heard that it needed restoring and that there was some flooding in the house that kind of prompted it being restored and turned into this, you know, beautiful museum that people can come and visit.
Yes. So the day that you visited the house, Nancy McCoy, who was the historical architect, she was there talking about the renovation. So in 2018, there was a bad winter storm. Many people experienced problems, but the pipes burst in the attic. The house was completely flooded. It had to be taken down to the studs. Because the house has a historic designation, the city really had to step up and raise the money to bring it back up to the historic designation standard of quality.
And it is nice, y'all. If you get a chance to come to Dallas and go to the house, you should, because it really does feel like stepping into history, the way that it is set up, the way that the stories are told through video, through artifacts, through the written word. There is so much to see in this house that as I went through, I was like, okay, I'll be back another day because there's so much to take in that, I feel like I need to come and visit multiple times and just to be in that home and just to know the history that the things that have happened there, the history of the house, the many famous people that came through. It is such a feeling. And I feel like it's an honor to be in the home, truly.
It is, and they did a beautiful job. The unique thing about the craft house, or what I really like about it, it's like you're walking into her scrapbooks. You know, you see the articles that she cut out of the papers, recipes, little things that she saved that would have been in her scrapbook. So she really is finally telling her incredible story. We're just we're just giving it a new generational voice. I refer to the house as being magical, not in a witchcrafty sense, but magical in the sense of supernatural things happen in this space.
Ooh.
So it is. It's always like, wow, how it's just showing you that there's a power greater than you out there. One of my favorite guests to come into the house, 3 women who lived next door to Miss Craft. They grew up as children there, and they were active in the youth council. And so they were in their front yard, and they were like, you could tell the hesitancy of, well, should we ask? Should we not? So finally, they did come over. And right before my very eyes, these women in their late 60s, early 70s, they transformed into little girls, and they were running around like, "Remember, I'd be over here ironing, and you'd be like, 'You're not ironing good enough, and you always got to cook.' And I always, and I'd be in there washing the windows." And they were just running from room to room. "And remember, this was so and so's room. Remember that time?" And it was just like, man, I mean, you talk about, my cup was filled that day. Just seeing them in that space and how much joy, and they shared memories with me. They were like, "Oh, and we knew it would make Miss Craft mad, but we'd kick our ball over the fence." And, and she'd be like, "Next time I'm keeping it." And it's like, how cool is it to have these regular childhood memories, but the person on the other side of the fence was doing things on a national level to elevate your quality of life, like, so
Right.
it is. It's there's always something or someone who comes by, and they just have an incredible story. Not once has anyone come by and even hinted at having a negative interaction with Mrs. Craft, and that speaks so much about the strength of character she possessed.
Absolutely. And I witnessed it myself. I mean, the day that I went to the museum, there was a woman there who was, like you had mentioned, the other ladies who lived next door to her. This woman was, well, she was probably in her 70s, I'm guessing, and she came with her daughter. And she was talking about how she was part of the youth council, right? I think
Yes.
that's correct, that Miss Craft was helping to organize and run. And as she's going through there, I just got the sense of history and how important a role model and a force she was for this woman who was, a young person at the time, and also how this older woman had translated this down to her daughter, who I can only imagine is telling those same stories to her children, and like just passing down how this woman was just such a great role model and activist, and really helped to teach them and to get them involved in activism as well. I just loved it. It was just like you said, it was magical. It really was.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Were also telling me a little bit about some of the men who come through, who
Yes.
don't, have the same appreciation initially as they walk through the door. Tell me about, some of those experiences.
So it is my own personal social studies experiment. I just started noticing that the majority of our visitors are women. We do really well between 35 and 44. Then the next group is 44 and up, mostly from Dallas. We do have a lot of people who are visiting. But I just started noticing that when men came into the house, it was, where can I sit? They just want to know where they can sit and wait while their wives look through the exhibit. Or they, if I was giving them a tour, they would bring it back to the men who she worked with. And it was just never about Mrs. Craft and the work that she was doing as a woman during this time period. And I started having the conversation. I really posed it to a lot of people about what do they think this is about. And one of the places where we've landed is that, number one, there's only 3 houses in the United States on this level, museum quality, that tell the story of an African American woman. And culturally, in the African American culture, we don't have spaces where Black women are really held up and honored. And not so much that they don't want to honor this woman or be in the presence and truly accept the work that she was doing, but it's not knowing how, because we've never had that communal experience. I think women, we come together and we can uplift our elders, and we know the work that they do, and then we can do that for men. You know, we can talk all day about, oh, what a great man he was, and this is what he does, but it's never reciprocated openly and in the public. Culturally, we're not in the habit of giving women the credit for the work that they've done. So it's like, to say, okay, well, Rosa Parks, she outlined, she did, or she was the political strategist that created the Montgomery bus boycott. Then it's like, well, but the man was forward facing. So it's almost like maybe they feel that we're taking something away from the role of the man if we're giving credit to the work that the woman was doing. So that is kind of my perception of, it's always, well, remember there was a man who did it, or there was, the man executed it, you know. But
Right.
instead of looking at it in terms of, these two people came together, you know, where he was weak, she was strong, and vice versa, you know, and that is how the work gets done. You know, not everyone can do everything. So,
Absolutely. And I've heard this and read about this before, about how the women in the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, were kind of, pushed aside, and the men were put out front as the ones doing the work and taking all the credit. And not that there's not credit for them to take, but there were these women who were working on the front lines and also on the background as well, holding up the movements. And we don't hear about them enough, and we don't hear their stories. How does it feel for you to be working at this home, being able to help tell the story of Juanita Craft?
oh, it's incredible. And I'm so honored that I'm in this space, especially at this point in my life where I have a true appreciation for an understanding of how hard women have worked to just move the needle just a little bit. And so when people come in, I tell them, I make sure that they know about other women whose voices have been silenced. And I give them references where they can look up a documentary or read a book, just to get them in the mindset of who else was back there in the shadows doing the work that needs to be elevated, just like Mrs. Craft. And we do, and we have these discussions, and I think posing it that way, for me, in my experience, has allowed her story to cross especially racial barriers because, non-Black women, they understand, maybe they saw their mother, doing the work in the background for their father to make him a success or their grandmother. So that is something I think that her story resonates with all women that we've all been silenced. But, now is the time. I think now more than ever is the time for us to say, okay, no, we're coming to the forward. We're
Yes.
coming to the front right now.
Yes.
My desire is that people from other communities see this house and see that it is possible to start renovating and capturing those homes and the history of the women who worked in their community and just start going back and seeing where were they connected, who were they connected with, and making sure their stories are told.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much to share. So in our discussion, you were telling me about a documentary you had seen that you suggested that I watch. You were naming other women and their stories that we should know about. Can you give us some of those names of women in history that you think have not had the recognition that they deserve? Give us a little homework. Who would you
Yeah.
recommend that we kind of read up or search out?
Well, definitely I mentioned to people, about, Rosa Parks. I unfortunately was told that Rosa Parks was just a seamstress and she was old and she didn't wanna get up off the bus, when in fact, I learned that Rosa Parks was described as being the top political strategist of her era, and that she had worked for the NAACP for 20 years before the Montgomery bus boycott started, and that her work was on the heels of Ida B. Wells, who was bringing awareness to lynching and was bringing awareness to the fact that the Klan had a campaign to violate the bodies of Black women. And she was calling these people out. And Rosa Parks picked up that torch and started that same work of going to these small towns where these women were violated and calling out the names of their abusers. And there was one where she almost got to court. At least there was some type of monetary payment to the family for the abuse that the woman suffered, but her name was Reese Taylor, and she had been violated by 12 men, and the judge paid her husband $600. So these are
What was that
stories.
$600 for? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, the $600 was paid to her husband because these 12 men in one night just did to Reese what her husband gets to do for free whenever he wants.
That's what the
And
judge said.
yes,
It's infuriating. It's
it is.
infuriating.
It is. It's very much so. And I think again that goes back to not having a culture of where Black women are celebrated. The other person that I always mention is Pauli Murray, who was, maybe she was the first or second African American woman to attend Howard University Law School. And when Thurgood Marshall went back to Howard Law and asked them about the cases that he was working on here in Dallas that dealt with the Brown versus Board of Education, Pauli Murray submitted an argument and he pretty much used it when he went before the Supreme Court. But now she's getting a little bit of recognition. I saw that they're going to print a quarter with her likeness on the quarter. But yeah,
That's news there. I didn't know
it
that.
is. Yeah. So
Mhm.
these are just people that we need to be talking about because they did the major lifting. And if we want this shift where Black men can come into a space that celebrates a Black woman and for him to feel at ease We need to bring forth these stories so that people have an understanding of the work that women have done. And it's funny, here recently, we're getting more school tours, and I had the little devil on my shoulder, and they were high school students. And so I was mentioning to them, I was like, even if a woman went to college, there were certain things that she couldn't study. She could be a nurse, but she couldn't be a doctor. And one little boy said, "Well, that kinda makes sense."
What? What did you say to
Yeah.
this little boy? What did you
And
say?
so I just let the girls handle it. I just stirred the pot a little bit, and they just, "What do you mean?" So he probably won't get a date for a while, but
And
at
that's
least
right. He doesn't deserve a
yeah.
date, ladies. Just for a
Yeah.
while, put him on the sidelines till he learns his lesson, maybe a little bit.
Yeah. So, but it's great. It's really it doesn't even feel like work being here and helping people to understand the impact or the footprint of this woman, and to plan programs where people can continue this legacy. So it's a good fit.
And I'm happy that you're doing it. And it sounds like you're really happy being there and you have so much knowledge to share. And I certainly appreciate that because, all these women that you just named and just the Rosa Parks story, you're right. A lot of us don't know that. We haven't been taught that. I mean, I was certainly taught that Rosa Parks was a seamstress and that she just was tired one day and didn't get up. I was not taught the backstory that she had been
Yeah.
working, in civil rights activism for, a couple decades before. We don't know that. And it's important that we do because I feel like so often it makes us seem like we were more passive than we were and the things just
Yeah.
came to us and they didn't. Black people had to fight for all of their rights, and telling these stories, we're learning that, we're seeing the strength, the resilience of our people and their creativity in overcoming the challenges that they faced.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Thank you for that.
And a good place to start is, in churches, because African American women could not be in the pulpit, but they were creating these different organizations within the church. They were printing up papers, they were teaching, they were helping kids get into college, they were doing etiquette classes. So these were all things that they were doing to advance the culture and the community. So, you can start there. These little auxiliary groups, I mean, they were a force to be reckoned with if you really go back and look at them.
And that makes sense because that's the place that the women had the power, that they were
Mhm.
allowed, quotes, unquotes, quote, allowed to have that power. So, yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Kendall. This has been fantastic. But we cannot let you go without getting all up in your business because this is Love in the Marriage Squeeze, the podcast. And so a lot of our listeners are African American women. Many, many are single. And so, what is your status? Are you single? Are you looking? What's going on with your love life?
Well, not much, but I am single and I am looking. So, yes.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye out, right? As
Okay.
I meet eligible bachelors, I'm keeping an eye out. I feel like I'm like there's some matchmaking in my future, so I'll definitely keep an eye out. Now, what
And,
kind of men do you like?
you know, I am I of course, they have to understand my creative spirit and my love of the arts. So, really just someone who knows who he is. I'm not taking on any more projects.
No more projects. I
No
understand.
more projects, just someone who has a good sense of self, good sense of family, has a vision for his life, and yeah, definitely has to understand my creative spirit.
I love it. I'm the same
Yes.
way. I got to have a man who like lets me fly creatively.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another question, all up in your business. Who would be like your ideal type, like your ideal man that we would pattern your new man after, right? Could be anybody dead or alive. What kind of man, can we pattern your future man after?
Okay. Well, can I take different parts from different people?
Of course, that makes it more exciting. Okay, tell us about
Okay.
this bionic man you're gonna
Yeah.
put together.
I mean, I love the look of Method Man as he's aging.
Yes.
I love the creative spirit of Lenny Kravitz,
Hmm.
and I love the nerdiness of Barack Obama. So I think that that would be, if you could put that together, I don't know what it would look like, but yeah.
Okay, well, we're gonna send that out to the universe. Now that we know, we're sending it out to the universe to manifest that man, because that
Yes.
sounds like a really nice man. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that combination.
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Kendall. It has been an absolute joy to have you here today. Thank you for coming and joining us and educating us and just sharing all your information and your love and passion for what you do.
Okay, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it.
Yes. We'll see you next time on the
Okay,
podcast.
thanks.
Thanks for listening, and a big thank you to Kendall Ferguson for joining us today and inspiring us with her work and celebration of African American women of the Civil Rights Movement. I hope you learned something today that inspires you and that you'll pass it on. We'd love to have you back, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast and check out our website at marriagesqueeze.com to get the latest updates and happenings on the docuseries. We'll see you next time. Until then, I'm sending lots of love your way.